¿Listos? Everybody ready? Muy buenas noches. Hello, good evening. I'm Alegría de la Cruz. I am the Director of the Office of Equity, and it is my honor and my pleasure to be hanging out with you guys tonight. I am so lucky to be working with the excellent people at Upstream Investments in the county's Human Services Department. And also just want to mention the excellent partnership of the Economic Development Board, who has been part of Team ARPA Equity. So we are here tonight to make sure that we as a community are working together and really facilitating important collaboration opportunities to ensure an equitable recovery from the pandemic. I know it's a little ironic to be talking about recovery. The sound is buzzing. Is anybody else hearing buzzing? No?
No.
Dauda, maybe that's your system. I'm gonna try to keep going if it's okay.
Okay. I don't know if it's my computer or else.
It may be. I don't think we're hearing confirmation from other folks that they hear buzzing. Anybody else?
No, you can try logging out and then logging back in. That usually helps.
Okay. So we're going to keep going. Jake, can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So we're in the middle of context setting. So what we're doing tonight is, I couldn't find a better explanation for this than kind of speed dating. What we really want to do is have those organizations that have experience receiving federal funds, which can be complicated and complex with lots of regulations, really get to know smaller community-based organizations that may provide some additional reach into those populations that we know from the data in front of us have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. So we are taking this opportunity to meet each other, to learn a little bit more about ARPA, and then we will be moving into breakout sessions to make sure that people get a chance to meet each other, to talk about their specific areas of expertise, the communities that they serve, and we would really encourage people to talk about those communities that you serve, to talk about maybe some of the cultural responsive skill sets that exist within your staff or within your work to really be successful in reaching folks that we know are still struggling in the middle of this pandemic. We're also going to make sure that we spend some time seeking feedback from you about how we at the county can continue to support this process for everybody involved, whether it's from the bigger organizations that choose to be fiscal sponsors, or from the smaller organizations that are still finding their way through figuring out how to receive federal funds and be part of a funding process at the County of Sonoma. And then we're going to provide some important resources to folks moving through this process and then close. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And we're going to take a moment. Next step. Next slide. Thanks, Jake. To talk a little bit about ARPA. So ARPA stands for the American Rescue Plan Act. It's a piece of federal legislation that was passed in March of last year and just recently had the final rule for implementation published. And what this act is designed to do is to make sure that local governments and our community-based partners have the resources to, I'm going to quote here, change the course of this pandemic and deliver immediate relief for American workers, for people who have been disproportionately impacted, to really support ongoing COVID disaster response efforts, to support vital public services and to help retain jobs, and to make sure that we're doing everything we can to stabilize families during these difficult times, as well as to address public health challenges. So we at the County of Sonoma are lucky to have received $96 million. And we're going to go into a little bit more detail later in this presentation about how we're breaking that up. We have a timeline to get this money both out the door and into people's pockets. So this money has to be obligated by the end of the year 2024 and then completely spent by the end of the year 2026. Next slide, please. We really want to get grounded tonight in making sure that we understand the ways in which COVID has disproportionately impacted communities of color and essential workers inside of our community. And so we're sharing some information here. This information is available on socoemergency.org, or in Spanish, socoemergencia.org. And really want to make sure that folks are able to access this and be prepared to show us the ways in which your services and your programs will be delivered to address the disproportionate impact that these populations have had. Just a couple of ways to understand this chart in front of us. So if we look at, for example, let's take Latinx and white non-Hispanic, right? So on the left-hand side in that column, you can see Latinx people in our community are 27% of the population. But we can see in that third column to the right that they still represent 51% of the cases in our community. So that's almost double, right? The amount of presence that they have in their community, double the amount of cases as a result of that disproportionality. When it comes to white folks, almost 63% of our population, but only 41% of the cases. And so we can really see, as we're looking at this data, the importance for our community to achieve an equitable recovery, to be very clear about our need to also invest and address this disproportionality in the ways that we're moving forward to address our recovery. Next slide. Again, this is data that can be found on the SOCO emergency site. Another way to understand this information, you can see that the purple line here is the Latinx population. That huge amount of disproportionality has never stopped throughout this entire pandemic. If we're looking at the ways in which our American Indian and Alaska Native population has been impacted, that's that kind of teal, light blue color there, also huge disproportionality. We're looking at the ways in which our Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander population has been impacted. That's that red line. You can see across the board, our communities of color, looking at the Black population, African-American, that green, that light green line, again, gross disproportionality. That still goes down to our Asian populations, as well as our multiracial populations. And that dark blue line at the bottom there, that's the white population. And so really wanting people to be comfortable with this data, understanding how this drives the importance of our response, and how critical it is for us to be really grounded in the human beings that make up these data points so that we can address them with loving care and with a real understanding of what their particular needs are. Next slide, please, Jake. This is the past 60 days to answer your question, Sarah. Thank you for the very timely teeing up here. So this is the past 60 days, and you can see actually the ways in which disproportionality in specific populations has really started to tick up. So that top green line here, that's the Black population that is now experiencing a huge uptick in COVID and COVID transmission and COVID cases. We can also see still that purple line, Latinx population, right underneath it. The blue, American Indian, Alaska Native, and our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander communities, they're all right up there at the top. And those outcomes are unacceptable. Those outcomes are the things that we working together need to change and address. We also see here, this is interesting, there's the white population has also ticked up, as well as the Asian population. So right now we're in a massive surge in our community, and we can really see the ways in which we're experiencing the surge among all communities, but still specifically the highest amounts of the surge in communities of color. Next slide, please, Jake. I am now going to turn this slide over to my colleague, Oscar Chavez from the Human Services Department, to talk a little bit about how we have worked with you and with our communities to seek solutions to the challenges that we face.
Thank you so much, Alegría, and thank you for grounding us in that powerful and important data and why we need to work together as a community to address disproportionality with these ARPA funds. As many of you are aware, we launched a pretty extensive community engagement strategy and effort to ensure that we heard from the experiences and that we received the feedback from those hardest hit by COVID. We launched 5 ARPA town halls in each of the supervisorial districts. Through the Office of Equity, they created an ARPA equity work group to help inform our process and to make sure that we were selecting the right priorities and the metrics and to ensure that we could embed a level of accountability in our work over our ARPA experience. We also went through a process of trainings for results-based accountability. This is something that the ARPA Equity Work Group also engaged in to ensure that we were getting to the root of the issues with the data and with the kinds of work that needs to be done to address the disproportionality in our community over time. We also surveyed all of those in attendance at our town halls, and we sent a survey to our community-based organizations to let us know the kinds of projects that they were interested in applying for. We also received input from the Board of Supervisors and from members of the community, the business community, the hospital sector community, and all of this information was compiled and presented to the Board of Supervisors at our December 14th meeting, where they gave us direction on the areas where we needed to fund and those dollars amounts. And I'm going to go into those in this next slide. So for the purposes of our conversation today, this slide represents the totality of the $96 million. But what is highlighted in red is what we're going to focus on. These are the 2 areas in which we are going to release a notice of funding availability for organizations to be able to apply and submit a proposal. I want to just note that the Board of Supervisors at this meeting also set aside $4 million specific to addressing housing and homelessness. And we're currently working with the Community Development Commission to see what will be the best vehicle to deploy those dollars to address housing and homelessness, and more to come on that. The board also set aside $3 million for broadband, and that is being managed by the Economic Development Board. There is also a recognition that there are members of our community that are still in need. And certainly with the Omicron going up, we also know that people need resources now. And so we're working hard to try to put together a plan to deploy resources through a rapid economic assistance program that we'll be launching shortly. The 2 buckets that we've identified are addressing disparities in public health outcomes and addressing negative economic impacts. So there'll be about 13.5 million to address disparities in public health and about 20.5 million to address negative economic impacts. Next slide. Within those 2 buckets, we've identified 8 priority funding areas. They are direct assistance to household, childcare and childcare facilities, educational disparities, small BIPOC-led businesses, nonprofits, and CBOs. This is support for these organizations, and to ensure that we are creating culturally responsive, we're creating culturally responsive disaster response and long-term recovery. One of the commitments that we've made and that we're working on as part of ARPA, and why we are engaging in the results-based accountability, is to ensure that at the end of the ARPA experience, we're able to tell a story about how these dollars were actually able to support an equitable recovery for those hardest hit by COVID, and to be able to move away from just understanding how much money went out, how many units of service were provided, but to actually understand how people are better off now as a result of these investments. There's another priority is mental health services, funding promotoras in our community. This was really recognized as an important need, as there were many promotoras who were disseminating information around testing and vaccination to our impacted community and housing and shelters. I'm now going to turn it over to Alegria, who will go into more detail in each of these funding priority areas. Alegria?
Gracias, Oscar. So working with the the wisdom and the experience of people in our community who have really suffered the most, who have lived through the most difficult parts of the pandemic, we recognize that because they are so close to those challenges, they are also closest to the solutions. And so these more specific examples of strategies underneath each of those kind of areas, we wanted to just kind of walk through here in this slide. So when we're talking about direct assistance to households, some of those strategies that came out of that work was talking about just getting money into people's pockets, making sure that rental assistance programs are not as burdensome, talking about piloting a universal basic income program. There's also the opportunity for us, and I want to highlight this with universal basic income, to think about partnerships with county departments. I know that Oscar and his team have really taken the lead and worked through, what is the viability of a universal basic income program in our county. So also there's opportunities for partnership between the county and CBOs that we want to make sure is available in this creative process that we're undertaking. Making sure that we are understanding that families need childcare subsidies to ensure that their kids are in safe places that are licensed and with trained people during these difficult times. Recognizing that under kind of the childcare and childcare facilities bucket, we recognize the kind of co-benefits that exist when you really invest in those facilities and in those institutions. You're also really helping to expand the workforce to be valued for the important work of caring for children, making sure that we're also ensuring that we're investing in capacity to push out these funds and inside of childcare and childcare facilities. And then also really, again, looking at that, what are those partnerships available to grow the safety net? Underneath educational disparities, our community members talked about addressing learning loss, recognizing that for high school students, this is a critical moment of deciding, is a post-secondary education available to me given what I've experienced in the last few years and really starting in 2017. Also recognizing that supporting the teaching workforce in our county is critical. Building new pipelines, figuring out how to develop ways to support teachers. Finally, under that last bucket there, what are not the last bucket, because there's going to be a whole nother slide here, but thinking about, how are specific investments in smaller BIPOC-led businesses, nonprofits, and CBOs. Again, addressing the systemic challenges that our systems create that in many ways kind of lock out or make inaccessible some of these programs and funds to those community members, those institutions in our community that are really the ones that we need to be holding in the middle of our work right now. Next slide. This continues on, right? Thinking about what does culturally responsive disaster response, and how does, ensuring that we do long-term recovery also in a culturally responsive way. We understand the importance of mental health services. We heard how critical it is for mental health services to be culturally responsive, to have providers be bilingual and bicultural, and not just in Spanish and English. How are we building supports inside of community to address the multiplicity of languages that are spoken in our communities, Indigenous languages, Cambodian, Vietnamese, Khmer, making sure that we're reaching into our Fijian and Eritrean populations who also make up disproportionately impacted members of our community to this pandemic. Highlighting again the work of promotores, recognizing that by funding the important work of community health workers, we are actually valuing the critical work that they do on the daily to reach into community members and share information and resources. Recognizing that there's a need for spaces to do that. So what does a resilient community hub look like? And again, these kind of community and county partnership opportunities to really elevate the work of promotores. And then last but not least, housing and shelter. We heard how critical it is for us to be more creative in the ways that we're providing housing and shelter opportunities for people, in a way that also provides additional resources for people who are coming out of addiction and out of self-medication due to the challenges of what it means to be houseless. And so those are some of the kind of the key strategies that came out of these important moments of contact with our community members closest to those challenges. Next slide. So let's talk about what a successful applicant, right? What will it take to truly move the needle on those really dire numbers that I shared at the beginning of this presentation? We recognize that there is no way that any one organization or one person will be able to solve these challenges alone. So we recognize the importance of being collaborative. A successful proposal really shows us that you've partnered with agencies countywide to meet, geographic differences in communities, or maybe you focus on one community that you're really grounded in. How are you culturally responsive? What does the skill set inside of your institution bring to address the disproportionality experienced in communities of color, in the immigrant community, and the essential worker community? And then making sure that we understand, that we're centering equity, right? So talk about the people that you serve. Make sure that we're clear on where you have that ability to focus on the folks who have been most disproportionately impacted here. And I think, it's really critical in this conversation that we talk about who is actually eligible to apply for these resources. Again, going back to recognizing that applying for and receiving and administering federal funds is complicated. And it takes some serious administrative capacity inside of those organizations to also bring in smaller organizations who may not have that capacity or that experience. Being able to serve as a fiscal sponsor or as kind of a hub for some of this work, that's also work. So how can we ensure that that you have the license to talk about the work that a larger, more well-resourced, or I know that's an oxymoron in terms of nonprofit work, but in terms of those organizations that have that experience and that capacity, how are we recognizing your fiscal sponsorship as a program cost and the needs for you to have staff to be able to manage multiple subcontracts or smaller organizations under your proposal? We want to help do that. We want to help support that. So making sure that you really understand the need to connect with some of these partners that you may not have worked with in the past, and that you're really able to articulate the role that you, as that fiscal sponsor or as that hub, will play in pulling these different partners together in a new way. Next slide. I'm going to pass it back to Oscar to talk a little bit about our timeline.
Great. Thank you so much, Alegria. And I just want to lift up a point that you made about the importance of collaboration. And one of the goals that we have here at the county is to help build the capacity of our smaller nonprofit organizations. And we've heard a lot of feedback already about the need to provide ongoing training and technical assistance, help our smaller organizations, make it easier to apply for county dollars. And so we've heard you, and we are looking at all of those aspects. And we're also leaning on our larger community-based organizations who have the experience in applying for and being successful in administering federal dollars to help and work with our smaller organization. And in recognition of that important work, we are saying, if you engage in a collaborative application, include the cost, the actual cost of providing that oversight, fiscal oversight, the technical assistance for these smaller organizations. We know that this is important because if we can strengthen the nonprofit sector as a whole, we will collectively do a better job in addressing the needs of members in our community. So that's a very important and new way, I think, of doing business between county and our community partners that I hope can remain as we learn a lot of how we can do things differently in our work collectively together. Just want to briefly go over the timeline and to let everybody know that we're working really hard to release this NOFA sometime in early February. to give our applicants enough time to meet with their partners. This is a forum designed to be able to share your ideas and to think about collaboration. We also know that there are other cities who have made decisions about where they want to allocate those dollars. So we also encourage our applicants to approach other municipalities. For example, we know that some cities are interested in childcare, as the county has identified one of those priority areas. So there could be an application not only with partners, but different funding partners as well. So be creative in that regard. We're also planning to put together a review committee that will not be made up of us. It'll be a sort of an independent review committee that will review and score all these proposals, and we'll go into more detail about that. But our goal is to be able to recommend sometime in May proposals for funding to the Board of Supervisors, and they'll have the ultimate decision-making authority. Once those contracts are awarded, we will meet with each of the organizations that receive those funds and agree on the performance metrics that we're going to monitor over the life of ARPA. One of the requirements is that we submit quarterly reports. So we'll be asking for data, and this data will live in a public-facing portal so that our community can see how we are expending these dollars and the kinds of results that we are getting. One of the key things that we want to do is to think about creating a learning community. What are we learning from this data? Not just about what is working, but also about what is not working, because we want to make sure that we don't get through the ARPA experience knowing that some of our strategies were not working. We want to intervene and course correct. So this is really a new opportunity for us to learn together about our work and to strengthen our collaborations and the results that we're getting with these sort of one-time dollars that we're not going to see again. So with that, I'm excited to have Chrissy Tudor. She's our Contracts and Procurement Manager with the Human Services Department, who will go into more detail about the NOFA process. And so Chrissy, are you here? And if so, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I am here. I get the pleasure of talking about the red tape and the strings attached to federal funding. ARPA is not CARES Act funding. It does come with compliance and reporting requirements. We've got some links here to the reporting guidance, to the final rule. We are subject to the rules and regulations of funding subrecipients, of which most of our grantees will be classified. So there will be compliance and reporting requirements, really in an effort to make sure that we do not have any ineligible expenses or put any of our agencies at risk for future federal funding. Next slide, please. Again, the uniform administrative requirements must be followed by us as the county, and when I say that, I include you in that, any of our potential programs. If you take a look at the next slide, it's got a nice little list of all of the things that we need to make sure that we follow. That's allowable activities, cost principles, cash management, eligibility determinations and documentations. There will be monitoring, which is a federal term I prefer, and you will get from us unlimited technical assistance. There are reporting requirements. ARPA has alleviated a little bit of the system of award management registration that is required. We're going to work with you on the information that you would normally report there if you do not at the time of the award. I would tell you, if you don't have a DUNS number as an organization, you should go ahead and get one. It should just take a couple of days. There'll be record keeping requirements beyond the grant period. If you receive or are awarded $750,000 or more per year, there are single audit requirements. And there are civil rights and equal opportunity compliance requirements. Again, we are here to support you, to support our agencies, to make sure that we are able to meet all these rules and regulations, because we really are partners in this going forward. And I think we're on to the next one.
We are. Thank you all so much for that wonderful information. So what we want to do today is really use our time together as an opportunity to begin conversations that we know and hope will continue beyond today, and to give you the opportunities to come together with other people and other agencies that may be interested in similar projects, in working with similar populations, where your work would be complementary and you could support each other. So we're going to move into breakout sessions, and we will have 7 theme-based breakout sessions, and each of these sessions are titled in accordance with sort of a funding bucket that was approved by the Board of Supervisors. So there'll be one breakout session for assistance to household and basic needs, one for childcare and childcare facilities, another for educational disparities, another for small BIPOC-led businesses, nonprofits, and community-based organizations. There'll be one for culturally responsive disaster response and long-term recovery, one for mental health services, and one for homelessness, housing, and shelter. And once we open the breakout rooms, you will have the opportunity to self-select which room you would like to go to. We also have 3 collaborative spaces open. So there are 3 rooms that are not associated with a specific funding bucket. So if there are a group of you where in your larger group you realize that you really want to have a side conversation, then you can say, you know what, let's go meet in collaborative room 1 and let's continue this conversation there. Or you can come back to the main room and we can help you get to that other room if you're having challenges with that. Jake, do you want to take us to the next slide?
And Joni, before you go on, I just want to, I see that there's a lot of questions in the chat. I just want to let all of the participants know that we will answer those questions. And if we don't respond via the chat now, that we will be posting the responses to those questions on the ARPA website as soon as possible.
Great, thank you, Oscar. Yes, we will. The questions in front of you, I'm not going to read through each one right now, but we have dropped a link to a Word document that has these questions listed in it. And then we'll also be listing the questions specifically in the chat. And these are designed in your breakout sessions to help start your conversation and help you really begin to get a feel for who else is in your room, what kind of work they're doing, what they're excited about. One way to frame it in your head is sort of, you've got about 50 minutes in this group. It's kind of like speed dating, right? Like get in there, get some information, figure out who you want to be with, and then move the conversation forward. Ask for a second date, right? That's kind of the direction that we're going with this. So think of it in that way. Make sure that everybody gets a chance to speak. When you're in your sessions for the first about 5 minutes, you'll have a county staff person there just to make sure you have your questions, make sure you understand the process and your goals. And then the county staff person will be leaving just so that you can have your own conversations about the type of work that you're interested in doing. If we want to go 2 slides ahead, Jake, so one more. And then just before we go and I give you your final instructions for breakout rooms, these are the resources that are available. So these are some of the resources available to you. If you go to sonomacounty.ca.gov, the ARPA website here that's listed, you'll find information on the final rule, compliance and reporting. We'll be posting the slides that you saw today there. We'll be posting a video recording of the presentation that you just saw, as well as our final about 30 minutes that we're going to have after our breakout sessions. There's also email, so you can contact us if you have any other questions. And like Oscar said, we will be posting answers to the questions in the chat. So those are some resources available to you. We'll also be dropping in the chat, I think it's in there already, but we'll be putting it in again, a link to a Google form. It's a very short form. It would be great if you could fill it out. It's your name, it's your organization, and what you're interested in. And then we'll be using that to create a list of the participants that came to the meeting earlier today, as well as this one. And then we'll be distributing that to everybody that attended. So if you have somebody that you made a connection with and you want to talk some more, you can refer back to that. Or you can look at the list and see, oh, look, here's other people interested in the same area that I'm in. I should reach out and contact them. So that contact form is in the chat. It takes a couple minutes. If you can fill it out, it would be really beneficial for everybody to have your information. So with that, If we want to go back one slide, what you should see when I open up the breakout rooms will look something like this. The rooms will have titles associated with the funding bucket, as well as 3 collaborative spaces. So just go ahead and self-select join, whichever one you're interested in. If you don't get this pop-up, there should be a button at the bottom that says breakout rooms. You can click on that and that'll open it up. And if you still don't get it, we're here and we can put you in whichever room you're interested in. So with that, I'm going to open up the breakout sessions. You'll have 50 minutes in there. We'll be hopping back into your room about 10 minutes before you're finished, and just letting you know that you've got 10 minutes and giving you some final thoughts to consider. See you soon. Welcome. So I hope you had some good conversations in your breakout session. We want to take the last 30 minutes that we're here and just go group by group, and we'll be asking for one person from each group to tell us 1 to 2 things that either ideas where you feel like this is a place where we really need additional support from the county, or things that rose up that you feel like this is something that the whole group needs to hear. But really keeping it to 1 to 2. We have about 30 minutes, and I know it's already evening and people maybe want to go eat dinner. So we'll work through our groups like that. Before we get started with that though, I'm dropping the link again to the contact form into the chat. So if you could fill this out, this will be a huge service really for you. We'll be taking everybody from this evening, as well as everybody that attended earlier, and sending you out a list of people and agencies that joined. So you'll get their name, their organization, contact information, as well as the area that they're specifically interested in. So whether you talk with them tonight, or you want to see who was, if this evening there weren't as many people in your group and you want to see who was doing this work from the morning, this contact sheet will really help you to make those connections. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I would love to hear from the people that were working on assistance to households and basic needs, just 1 to 2 ideas of places where you need support from the county, or something that you just need to raise to the larger group as an idea.
So I'm going to present for our group, and the conversation focused a lot around the needs that impact those that have been sick with COVID, and food distribution. But something that rose to the top towards the end of the conversation that really resonated is all of us as community-based organizations have to rely on volunteers, and our volunteer corps, the people that we rely on to do a lot of the delivery of our services, was greatly impacted. And many of them have not been able to go back to work, but they're still showing up to volunteer. And so we were talking late in the conversation about, is there a way where we could build job training skills and reimburse some of the volunteers for the actual work that they're doing for us to do distribution. So that was the one thing that kind of rose to the top in our conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elise. So, as you're hearing ideas too, it may spur in you other ideas that you want to incorporate into some work that you were doing. And I can see things already coming up with what Elise shared that might, where that might be an option. So let's go ahead and move on to childcare and childcare facilities. Is there someone from that group that wants to share?
Yeah, I can share about that. I'm with 4Cs, and some of the things we've been thinking about are helping with deep cleaning as a result of COVID for providers, and losses that providers have experienced due to that. Another one is bridging the gap between what the state is paying and what families have to pay. So there's families have to pay co-pays and family fees when they have subsidized childcare. And the last one is that we actually have a lot of state funding now to give subsidies to families for childcare, but we can't get it out the door because we don't have staffing, and we can't pay them enough, and we can't give hiring bonuses. So maybe help in getting people on board to start doing the enrollments and get this funding out the door and help the families. So those are some things that we're thinking about.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sarah. All right. What about from our educational disparities group?
So I'll be reporting on that. And one of the major programs that we discussed is like an expansion or if I understood correctly, like a replication of the probation camp program for youth on probation or youth in the juvenile system and needing that extra support to gain to learn some new technical skills, job skills, and the essential life skills to move forward and in that post-secondary life. So expanding that further to a wider population and not just probation who are finishing their probation period, but also recommendations from the community for, as our not favorite term for this, but the at-risk youth who may benefit from this additional type of education or post-secondary education, or even while they are in high school and finishing their education, K-12 education. We talked about having this type of opportunity for more kids. Also, I'm Elizabeth Escalante with the API Coalition of the North Bay. And part of that too, we also talked about how this this post-secondary type of program would be serving a wider population and not just, for who we mostly see in there. Most of the time, a lot of Spanish-speaking youth who would come through these programs. There were also moments when there were API youth who did make their way. So at least like with this brand new organization, we want to partner up with those to help support those organizations or those programs to help them feel better prepared when serving their whole population.
Wonderful, Elizabeth. Thank you for sharing. It sounds like you had a great conversation about some really concrete ideas in your group. Thank you so much. Let's go ahead and hear from our BIPOC business, nonprofits, and CBOs group, which was a pretty large group. We'd love to hear one or two ideas that you had or places where you'd like to see support from the county.
Hey, Joni. I had the pleasure actually to be hosting a wonderful group of folks, and boy, it was very diverse and very encouraging just to hear how each of the sectors, the community sector, babysitting, you name it, it was amazing. Everyone had some fantastic things to say. One thing that did come up, and it was it's pretty straightforward, is please return the calls. I believe that there's been times that they've called the equity department and the calls have not been returned, at least to get something said that, you're busy and it's going to be totally fine. We understand that things could be happening in the back end. And the other one I thought was very dead on: support to questions answered during the application process. If there, I'm pretty sure that there's going to be some fields or anything that support might be required, and to have someone on standby just to answer some questions would be great. That's another one that came up. And then of course, just to support in the process to apply for those without experience, which I think we've been hearing this a lot in our groups, even before this meeting when we had our committee. And that's about it. But I think that, valid points, and that share with them.
Wonderful, Hector. Thank you. And one of the things that came up too, just similar to what you were saying this morning, was the need to continue to look for spaces like this one today to give people the opportunity to have these conversations and to continue to partner, so we can continue to look into opportunities to offer that. What about from our culturally responsive disaster response group?
Hi, this is Maite Turi. We were a really small group, and we really felt we needed to connect. None of us could apply for a federal grant that were in this group. None of us qualified. So we really need to be able to connect with those who can. So that's really our ask, is a way that we can connect with people who can support us and collaborate with us, because we much of the criteria, but actually we meet all the criteria, but we need the support of a organization that can apply and help us.
Great. Thank you for raising that. I think that getting the contact information for the people that attended this morning may be a big help in that area, just in showing you who else you might like to reach out to. And I think I see a hand from Fred. Did you have a question or comment?
Yes, I was in that group, and it kind of strikes me that the speed dating metaphor here is that it introduced a kind of element of chance of maybe you might meet the person that could really help you out or not. And so I think that what would be really helpful for the county would be to lay out some kind of step-by-step process here rather than have it be kind of a chancy thing. And so that just like the ERAP application, have it a sequential thing where you're laid out step by step and then have a resource of who you might contact. That would be really helpful to give some structure to how people might move forward who might not make those contacts today, or the form might not work, or some more step-by-step instructions I'd suggest.
Thank you for that, Fred. One of the things we heard earlier from those that participated was the desire to continue to have more of these types of forums, to build those kinds of relationships. One of the things that we don't want to do is sort of handpick who should be working with whom.
Oscar, you're on mute.
I hear him just fine.
No, I think I'm just, maybe my connection's not as bad. But we're going to look at seeing how we can facilitate more collaboration, but we want to make it clear that we don't want to sort of play the role of sort of matchmaking, but we want to facilitate a greater understanding of the capacity of various different organizations and groups. And, like Maite brought up the issue that there's a lot of organizations who don't have the capacity to apply for federal funding. I think we can look into that and to figure out how we can help bring these smaller organizations with the larger organizations. But your point is well taken, and it's something we'll look into.
And we'll get to this at the end, but we will share some resources as well that will kind of walk you through different steps of the requirements and what it does take for federal funding. And, if you need to get a DUNS number, what that looks like, just to put that out there. But as Oscar said, it is hard because we have this delicate balance of wanting to build the connections, and we will be in a procurement time period. So we can't be, we have to be creative around how we're building the connections, but not seen as providing any preferential treatment to one particular entity and or group of proposals.
Great, thank you all. All right, I want to move us forward and hear from the mental health services group. What are one or two things that came up for you in areas that you might need support, or things that you wanted to share broadly with the group?
So this is Jerry Lalundberg. I was with that group. I think the thing that came out first for me was, and from the other members of the group, is building on the successful processes that we already have. Notably Sober Circle, or enhancing or recreating the previous CIP, Community Intervention Program, those kinds of things. The other thing that was, because of the configuration of who we were, there were only 6 of us, and there was there was a South County orientation. So trying to do something that would be like basically a proof of concept in these first 2 years in Petaluma and Sonoma, to sort of try to pull that together, something that we could recreate, but particularly that was focused on Measure O, Cal AIM, the long-term plan for aging, different kinds of things that using this money strategically, knowing that it's only going to be here for 2 years.
Great.
We didn't talk specifically about what more we wanted from the county.
Sure, no, that's fine, but it's nice to see the idea of looking at work that's being done and how are we looking for sustainability in some of this work too, right? So thank you. And then I think too, for a minute there, I think I saw Grace's hand up. Grace, did you want to add a comment or question?
Oh, yes. I just want to mention that there are some groups, particularly from this morning's meeting, that are already starting to get together on Zoom and work it out, see if they continue to conversation basically. And I think this would be very helpful, particularly when we get your contact list, then remember, this person said, we can get that person involved. Just a suggestion.
Great, thank you, Grace. Yeah, I encourage you all to reach out to the contact list when we send it out after this meeting. All right, we'd love to hear from homelessness, housing, and shelter, and 1 to 2 ideas you had or questions, places where you saw a need for support from the county.
Sure. So I'm Beth, and I have the honor of presenting our conversation. So we talked a lot, obviously, about just the lack of housing and how there's been severely impacted folks as a result of that. And we were talking right up to the last second about lots of different ideas. So I hope I'm going to do the group justice. I think there was a connection that might have been kind of starting to formulate around, how do we pair this with home key funding for potential acquisition and rehab or something more long-term to help with the lack of housing, despite the fact that it has to be spent down in 2 years. We didn't quite get there, but my brain continued the conversation. And then, kind of to echo sort of what everyone else has been saying around what assistance we need from the county. And Kelly, I totally hear what you're saying around the NOFA development, but really helping with them in a more concrete way with identifying agencies and partners, organizations, county departments, whatever it is that are interested in applying. And so this format's really helpful, maybe more of these, but also maybe we're looking forward to the list, I guess. And also more concrete guidance for developing service providers and some good assistance for those folks as well.
Great, thank you so much, Beth. And everyone, excellent ideas. And it sounds like you started some good conversations, and we do just really want to say again that this is just the beginning of these conversations, and we really encourage you to continue them amongst yourselves and as you go forward in this process of thinking through projects that would really support our community. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Alegria and Oscar to close us for the evening.
Thank you so much, Joni. Thank you so much, community, for being here tonight and sharing the space and your wonderful ideas, and for continuing to build partnerships with us and with each other. We are taking seriously everything that we've heard tonight, all of these wonderful recommendations and ideas, and we'll be in touch with lots of good information and ways to continue building these partnerships to strengthen our ability to ensure an equitable recovery in our community, given the disproportionate and horrifically disproportionate impact of COVID in our communities of color here locally. Oscar?
Great, thank you so much, Alegria. And again, I want to echo the thanks to all of you for giving of your time, and it's so important that we hear from you. I know that we didn't get a chance to hear all of the ideas that you had, and we want to get those. So if Jake or Joni, if we can put a link of an email where people can continue to send those recommendations to us. And again, we want to engage in a partnership. We know that if we bring our best thinking together, we're going to come up with some good strategies that will live beyond ARPA. And that's one of the goals that we have. We have an opportunity to seed some innovative strategies or to properly invest in things that we know are already working. And so let's work together to make sure that we can realize and address the root cause issues that have created so much disproportionality in our community. And we are just excited to be in partnership with all of you. And we want to continue this conversation and change the way that we do business collectively in our community. So thank you again. And if there is nothing else, no additional instructions, we'll let you go 10 minutes early. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
All right.